So have you been to Mexico? I mean, you must have been to Mexico. You must have.
I've seen very little of it, but a very beautiful part, which is Tulum, one of these ancient communities. My mind immediately went to these, ancient peoples just living the good life there. No social media, probably not a lot of clothing, just a lot of going down into that beach, coming back, drinking wine, eating some good food.
But are you describing the life of the ancient people, or are you describing your holiday now? These seem interchangeable.
Well, it's interesting. There's probably more clothing, but it reveals more these days. And then you're not far from Cancun, which is this big, orgy of tourism.
But Cancun that's the bit that I have heard of.
Yeah. It's funny because I think they're probably, 30 or 40 kilometers apart. But you've got this pretty well-preserved, beautiful ancient city, and then you've got, these massive sort of steel and glass hotels right on the beach, and just everyone's lubed up with their
I beg your pardon?
Sunscreen.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. You thought I was going there, and I wasn't. I wrong-footed you, my friend.
But you were already telling me about nakedness and wine. What comes naturally after that? The only other bit of Mexico that I can confidently name is there's two other bits of Mexico that I can confidently name. Is Tijuana.
Yeah.
If I pronounce that anyway correctly.
Tijuana. Yeah.
Tijuana. Okay, right. Only because. Didn't Herb Alpert have a band named after the Tijuana Brass?
Herb Alpert and the Tijuana Brass, yeah.
There we go, there we go, right, yeah, I've heard of that.
He has a fairly new record out, too. It's I think it's 2024. It's very good.
He's still got it.
He is.
And then the only other bit of Mexico that I can name is the Gulf of Mexico, but I'm not allowed to name that anymore.
No more, my friend. No more. The sea previously known as the Gulf of Mexico, that's what we call it now.
We're going to have to throw away a lot of atlases. It's going to be a big waste of paper.
Yeah. Hello and welcome everyone to the Two Real Cinema Club. My name is Andres Lorente.
And I am James Rosica. And every episode on the Two Real Cinema Club, we watch two movies, we watch a new movie, and we watch an old movie, and we try and connect the dots. Speaking of dots, audible ellipsis, we're close to the Oscars. Now, it's next week at the Oscars. I don't know why I'm excited. But we're scooping up like the last of the nominated films.
Oh, I guess we are, yeah.
So this week we've watched the new Netflix-based Mexican transgender drug cartel musical, Emilia Pérez. Do you know how many Oscar nominations Emilia Pérez has?
You made that sound worthy of 13, I'm going to guess.
It has 13 nominations.
Got it right.
More nominations than anybody else, 13.
Wow.
And when we discussed what film we were going to watch, I think we both noted that there has been nothing but bad publicity about this film since it was released.
Yes.
Pretty much every source I've looked at have said it's terrible, it's cringeworthy.
Yeah.
I've been noting down just a long list of the complaints that people have about this film. So supposedly the transgender lead is not played by a transgender actor. The lead actor has written a load of racist tweets. Everything about it is bad. And I'll ask you about this later on, but it's a Spanish language film made by a French director, and so as a result, the Spanish is bad. I will ask you about that later. So I don't know about you. I went into this movie with exceptionally low expectations, virtually a hate watch.
We
just chose it because it's a zeitgeisty film. But now that we have actually seen it, what's it really like?
Exactly. Yeah. I think going in with the hate watch in mind is probably a good thing.
It's difficult to be disappointed that way.
Exactly. I think, if you go in with low expectations, then if they're met, that's fine, right? It's actually done what it's supposed to do. And if it's better than that, then it's just a pleasant surprise.
Everybody is happy. Well, so shall I at least tell you the story of Emilia Pérez, and then we can get our knives out?
I thought I was supposed to tell this story. What's the arrangement?
Oh, wait a second. Yes. You're doing this. I've got it wrong already. I don't believe it. Oh, what a disaster. I'll cleverly edit that later on to make it sound like I knew what I was talking about.
Well, I could just tell the audience right now, James knows what he's talking about. Trust me. Always. It's just that he was ready to tell the story And I'm just prepared to tell this story, and maybe not what's going to be the better story, I think. But I could tell you the story. So this is directed by Jacques Audiard, the film that I know of his is called The Beat That My Heart Skipped.
I've seen that as well. That is the only film of his that I also have seen, which is like, it's a weird kind of French film about a gangster who is also an aspiring classical pianist.
Precisely. And I liked it at the time. Did we see this film together? Did you see it at the BFI?
Yeah, possibly. Maybe we did see it together, I remember I stored it away in my mind as a French film type B.
I think it was a group of 4 or 5 of us. We had a few pints beforehand, and I think I was most impressed with my ability to hold my bladder until the end of that film. Because once you get in some of those theaters, you can't really get out very easily. And in my older age, I don't do that. I wouldn't have 2 pints before a film, but I think I did, and I needed. So that's my experience with Jean Audiard, who also wrote this film with Thomas Bidegain. I think it's Bidegain. Looks like Bide Gain, and Léa Misius. So it's a team of 3. I thought that this was originally a stage musical, but I don't think that's the case. I think this is directly to the film. Do you have any insight there?
Yeah, I think it is based on a book.
Okay.
The book, sadly, I hoped to read it, and I could not find an English translation. It's only available in French, I think.
Okay. Features Zoe Saldana, Selena Gomez, and Carla Sofia Gascon is the titular character of Emilia Pérez. Although at first, that character is not the titular character. Ooh, our audience is intrigued already. I'm going for it. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm all ears.
The film opens on a mariachi group. Cliche, anyone, cliche. There's a mariachi group. We'll talk about that later, perhaps.
Yeah, I have something to say about that. Yep,
there's going to be a knock on the door for that one. They're sort of combing the streets of Mexico City where people are out sort of buying stuff. It's one of these street scenes with lots of, food carts and merchandise hawkers and whatnot. We meet Rita, played by Zoe Saldana. She's an attorney prepping a case in defense of a man who she will clear or help to clear of the killing of his own wife by presenting it as a case of suicide. So she gets her client off. And then after her success, she receives this sort of mysterious offer from a grisly telephone voice that promises to make her rich. We learn from the opening images that she really has no time for babies. She lives in a kind of meager housing arrangement, at least by lawyerly standards. But maybe the Mexican lawyer or her position, she might have been a paralegal. I really couldn't figure out exactly how far along she was. But she didn't have enough money, so of course she's going to answer the call, right? I mean, going from poverty to money is a big step.
I hope to do that one day myself. Yep.
Screenwriters, unemployed screenwriters is definitely, again, it's like low expectations. You start low, anything, you're happy with yourself. She takes the job, but she's soon kidnapped by the minions of Manitas del Monte, an infamous and murderous drug lord who wants to change both his gender and his life. Rita's job is to arrange all the operations, the surgeries, organizing the logistics of the whole procedure, and to get the medications that Manitas needs in Thailand and Israel to make all of this happen. It has to happen quickly because Manitas wants to live her own life, though it means losing his family. That's Selena Gomez's Jesse and their young sons, who are all shipped off to Switzerland with absolute vaults of cash to live in safe seclusion there. Is Manitas going to fake a death and transition to a woman? Spoiler alert, darn it. Just to escape the law and maybe his past? Can surgical transition from man to woman transform a murderous criminal into a kind, sympathetic, and effective advocate for the disenfranchised Mexican people? And can a person burn the book of their past and rewrite a better book for the future? This is just the first act there.
Yeah, the wake up from the surgery is at 40 minutes, I timed.
Oh, is that right? So it's a longish first half. I forget what's
I guess.
The film's about, 2 hours 15 or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
Okay, a little more than 2 hours. I'm going to say straight up that I think that first act, either I couldn't tell. Could it have been the second act, or could it have been just a 5 or 10 minute sequence? The timing didn't feel quite right to me. And also the surgeries, once there's a lot of singing to get towards the surgeries. And then the actual transition is fast.
Yep.
It's like it happens within a minute or two of screen time. He goes to she. And I think that's such an interesting journey that I wish there had been more of that somehow. So I think for me, the organization of this film was, I think it didn't work in its own favor. And then I'm not entirely sure why it was a musical, but I'm sure you have insights into that with your knowledge of the musical art forms.
We're flirting with the spoiler bell.
Yes, we sure are.
I've got a couple of things to say before we ring the bell, but then we should ring the bell.
But could the bell be an explosion, or maybe a chorus of gunfire? Or a mariachi band would be best, I guess. Always mariachi.
It certainly should be a musical bell. You know what I've written at the top of my list of thoughts here? I've written that I really enjoyed this film. I thought it was a blast.
Oh, good.
Literally and metaphorically. I am very surprised that the vibe is so overwhelmingly negative, because I had a great time. I've watched it twice. I was explaining before we started recording. So we both watched this movie, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Then I kind of slightly speed watched it again yesterday to prepare for the pod.
Yeah.
And I think it's a pretty joyful, pacey, fun experience. I don't think, having watched it twice now, I don't think I agree that first act is too slow. Maybe the first time you see it, feels like a little while until it gets to the point. But I think when you know where it's going, you watch it for a second time, it all breezes past nice and quickly. I wonder whether the main reason why this film has received so much opprobrium is because it contains a lot of things that conservative watchers really hate. This film contains nothing but trans people, Mexicans, drug dealers, women. There are effectively no real male characters in this film of any significance. This is a film starring women about women.
Yeah.
It stars a large NGO concerned with righting social wrongs.
Yeah.
It contains no white men at all. This is all. It's like a tick box of things that conservatives hate. I wonder whether that's part of the reason why it's had such a drubbing. That's a word, isn't it? Drubbing.
Drubbing, yeah.
Yeah. I got to the end and I kind of realized basically this movie is like it's a Mexican soap opera.
Yeah.
So it is melodramatic and big, and it has these huge sweeping plot points and these kind of massive shifts. There is nothing small or subtle in this film. Everything about it is bright and loud and colourful, and that I think is probably part of the reason why I enjoyed it so much. I think it's a blast. I think it's great. I really had a great time. Good.
I like your point about why maybe the surface reason that a lot of people don't like it, or they're claiming they don't like it as a story. But I think you've got a good point that might cover them for some of the more honest reasons that they don't like it. Yeah, I like that. And I have, honestly, I've read a few things about it. I haven't read many reviews. I came to not liking it quite independently and of my own volition, I guess. So, but there is a lot of negative press on it that I understand. And I mean, it's obviously a lot around the central character too, which is unfortunate. But, I think I disliked it for other reasons, but I like, I'll have to question my bias on this one. Maybe am I the same way? But I mean, I love films with lots of women and brown people. I could do with a little less of the sort of stereotypical violence, but I think the way that you have characterized it as a Mexican soap opera or Latin American soap opera, I think is pretty good. I mean, it's pretty good summation. I think a lot of the soap operas go on and on and on and on. So if you're going to do one, I think it's nice to focus on one story. So that might be a good decision on their part, is to sort of have, it's instead of characters that are just going on and on and on, some of these soap opera characters live for 40 or 50 years as long as the actor's alive, and the story becomes very repetitive and a little thin. But here, I think they do have the option to have some rich lives in a couple hours. But I think that some of the transitions were just jarring for me, I think. And there are a couple of standout scenes that I definitely want to talk about. But then, for me, not a lot of original storytelling, even though this is such a different beast, such a different film than we've had in recent history. I think it depends on some potential knocks on the door later, I guess, but sort of works on that level, perhaps.
I'm going to ask you one other question just before we ring the spoiler bell, and we'll kind of get into the nitty-gritty. My question is just, I have no authority to make any judgment on this, but you do. Is what I read about the Spanish in this film being bad actually true? Did you? Because there's a lot. There's a lot of Spanish, much more Spanish than English in this film, and I'm guessing you don't need the subtitles.
I usually use them anyway. Yeah, no, because the accents are always so very different. That I wouldn't say that that's true. I mean, were people expecting like European Spanish or something like that?
Maybe, I don't know.
There are so many different accents, and most of this seemed like it was fairly northern Mexican. I didn't have a problem with it. I don't think it was. It wasn't striking anyway, not at all. I mean, you're navigating some pretty difficult territories. You've got to have a lawyer's Spanish at one point, or for one character for sure. You've got to have there are a lot of sort of gangster types in this film, so you've got to have that level or that brand of Spanish as well. You've got male voices and a lot of female voices. I don't buy that. I don't think that. I mean, and maybe my ear is not fine tuned enough for that, but that's the least of the problems for the film, I think. And if anything, it's just a success. Just to get a film in front of that many people, which is quite bilingual. With some bilingual actors, I think that's fantastic. It's a step forward. So, I mean, I think language purists are probably going to have a problem with it, but that's, language is evolving and language is different from one house to the next. So I think that's an inaccurate, I think, assessment.
Okay. I feel better. That's good. Well, okay, let's ring the bell, and then the gloves are off. Okay, here's the bell coming to you from a cliched Mexican church tower.
Yes, every town square has the big church with the bells ringing to call the congregants in. So,
theme of the film. That's one of the things that I quite like about this. One of the many things that I quite enjoyed is the way that the theme is very clearly stated. That Zoe, and I'm gonna ask you this. I've been saying Zoe Saldana all week. Is that wrong?
Is there an Enya? Does she have an Enya? I don't. Yeah, I think I always say Saldana because I think that's the way it's spelled because no one keys in the tilde over the end. Right, it's probably Saldana. Okay. Yeah, you're right, but I'm not 100% sure. You'd have to have that tilde.
Her character, like Rita Mora, she goes to see this Israeli doctor who agrees to do the operation, but he tells her, you can change your appearance, but not the person inside.
Yeah.
And this is the theme of the movie. It's very clearly stated by a minor character fairly early on in the film, and it stays true. But I'm quite pleased that it's true, kind of for all of the characters. So Emilia is our central character who has this kind of gender affirming surgery and tries to bury her past, but because she was previously a violent drug lord, at the end of the movie, she also comes to a violent end following a violent life. She's not able to change that kind of inner part of herself. But it's true for the other characters as well. So for Zoe Saldana's character, for Rita Mora, she starts out as a kind of like a gopher and an apologist for a kind of a shyster lawyer, and then she becomes a gopher and an apologist for another kind of shyster. Yeah. And then, Jessie, who is the wife, Selena Gomez's character, she kind of, she has, a lover in her past life, and then she goes back to the lover, and that kind of dooms her. And then later on in the film, Emilia has an affair with a woman, and even kind of that woman is, although, she has a husband, and then she goes to find out whether the husband is alive or dead, and when she finds out that her husband is dead, she's delighted because he was a horrible, violent man, and yet she then loves Emilia, who is also a horrible and violent person, but in a slightly different way. So people are kind of, all the characters in the film are sort of doomed to repeat their fate. which is consistent with the theme of the film. So I think it's been very sort of consistently thought out and developed. So I thought they captured that well and really explored it.
Yeah, it ends up being quite pessimistic as a theme, and your character arcs are flat as a result. They go through experiences, but they don't really change through those experiences. And I think that's what's missing for me is that those arcs. I don't buy all these cliches about character arcs and all that. I mean, you can have some stories where the character is just the same. You're going to see it in the second film, I think, for one character. It's just the same, and it's great because the character is so interesting or so evil or so bad. But in Emilia's character, it's someone who we're trying to see go from being real badass and then changing into this angelic character on some level, and then not really ever getting the full badass out. But I think you don't the moments. Like the transition scene, as I said before, those surgeries, they talk about them. It's built up. You bring this Israeli character in. He's a doctor. They bring him to Mexico. He has to interview Manitas de Monte to make sure it's real, that the surgery really is appropriate and all that. There's a trip to Thailand for Zoe Saldana. I mean, there's a lot of that sort of stuff. You don't get a lot of character out of it. You get a lot of plot. You get a couple of, I'm going to say, silly songs in those segments too. And you don't see the transition for Manitas del Monte up to Emilia Pérez, really. And then all of a sudden, it's 4 years later. And we're in London, right? All of a sudden, we're in another place,
exactly.
London. And I just think those 4 years of her life would be fascinating. Like, what's that transition really been like? How have people treated her in Europe? Was it all in Europe? How was she monitoring her family who was in Switzerland? It's sort of this complete abandonment for a little while. And then even Zoe Saldana, she's got this new career. I think there was a man in her life in London, but then she drops everything. So you don't see any even mini arcs. I think a few mini arcs would be helpful. And as a result,
just like a straight lurch.
Yeah, you just end up. And at one of the knockout scenes, it's the one in the trailer too, is when they meet back up, because presumably after the surgery, Zoe doesn't really have any more responsibilities or in terms of Emilia Pérez. And then all of a sudden they're at this dinner scene, and it comes out that they're at the same table, they know each other, and I was very wrong-footed from the trailers, because it looks like this intense scene where Zoe Saldana's life is on the line, the way it's played out, and it's not that at all, and that's nice. It's an unexpected surprise, of course, but that scene should be way more powerful, I think, and it's because they've just jumped 4 years with no background in either of those two characters that it doesn't make sense, and that's kind of that's the midpoint of the film probably, or early midpoint maybe.
Yeah,
it happens so fast that it's almost the end of Act One. And that's why I think there's some act problems here, because you've got both the sort of the call, right, the closing window or the opening window of changing gender, but you've also got 4 years gone by and all these changes. There's this other window immediately, and there's no idea what's happening between them too. So I think for me, I think the structure could make a big difference. I think either the transition and life after the transition could have been the entire middle act, and then the third act would have been probably shorter in what happened later. But you end up getting this sort of heavy-weighted film somehow with a bit too much first act, and I'm just not sure that I would have done it that way. And I think it would have been much more of a surprise if Zoe didn't just have Emilia Pérez come right back into her life, but there were other signals, and maybe she was being followed or something like that, just to amp up the tension a little bit. But it all comes kind of easily, and I think a different structure would have worked. But by the time you squeezed in the 2 songs or 3 songs about going through the operations and all that, you're up to, as you said, 40 minutes. I was surprised. I was going to say maybe 25 or something like that.
Yeah, so it takes 40 minutes to get that far.
Yeah.
I think the way that I would picture the structure, I think the midpoint is the point where they form the NGO. So So kind of Emilia turns back up in Rita Mora's life. To say, I need, you are my fixer. Now I need you to fix some way for me to get my ex-wife and my children to move in with me, so that I can sort of try and rebuild my family. And so she arranges all of that, and then the two of them go out for lunch in town, where there's a woman who's handing out notices saying, have you seen my son? He's one of the disappeared, presumably killed by drug cartels. and and that is what stimulates her to use her old crime connections to find out where the bodies are buried by asking the prisoners, what do you remember about this disappearance or that disappearance? And that inspires her basically to use this power that she's had kind of for good. That is kind of like her real attempt at a transition, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's one thing to go from presenting as male to presenting as female, but I guess they're using this as a metaphor that she's now going as presenting from evil badass to presenting as angelic good person who's helping to undo some of these wrongs.
Yeah.
So I'm guessing there's quite a cute song which I think is more or less at the midpoint of people who are queuing up to find out the truth about what happened to their friends or their loved ones, and they end up forming this big sort of tableau of just little faces in the darkness.
Yeah.
And I think that is the point where the film ticks over from the first half of the second act to the second half of the second act.
Yeah.
That's also kind of like a bit of a turning of the page there, because then Emilia starts to enjoy this new life. She has a lover. Things are all looking good. Yeah, and then it's only when Jesse says, I'm going to move in with Gustavo and take the kids with me, and that it all kind of collapses back down again, and that then throws us into the third act, which then becomes a sort of an orgiastic burst of machine gun fire.
Yes. Yep, that's a pretty good summation of the structure as it is. Yeah, I like that. To get to that midpoint, though, you have to live through this one cringy scene. It's a Flashdance-like scene of Selena Gomez talking about how horny she is for Gustavo Mora. Oof. And again, it's also because it's Selena Gomez, you think, okay, that scene was sort of made for her. It's singing, it's dancing, and it doesn't come off as being particularly good. And I was disappointed at that moment, because I thought, that would there's a karaoke scene later that she does with Gustavo, which is probably a bit better in terms of the singing and such. But it's also it's funny because I don't think the strengths of this film are in the leads as singers and dancers, and yet it really sort of imposes those moments on the actors. For me, the better scenes are they're really good. There are a couple of really good scenes. The other one I liked is when Jessie comes home. I think it's after the karaoke scene, maybe. She's been drinking. She's been with Gustavo Mora, and then Emilia sort of starts sitting down. They drink whiskey together, and she's probing Jessie about her husband, which, of course, is Emilia Pérez in a former life. And it's a really interesting scene, and it's really quite good. But it's funny that I don't think that's one of the scenes that people would talk about that much when talking about the film, because they're talking about some of the singing and dancing pieces. So I think that I can't really justify it as a musical. I really don't think that the songs were strong enough, or the placement was strong enough. And there are a couple long passages where there's no music at all. It seems like there's first act has definitely 3 or 4 songs. There's no question about that. And then there's this middle part where there's not a lot of music, and by the end there's not a ton either. So I don't think it's fully wedded to the idea of really being a musical. It's not committed to real big showstopper songs. There's another one where they're having a gala for the NGO, right? And there's this other metaphor. I think it ends kind of in an earthquake or something like that, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
And it's again, it's a set piece, but I don't think it's a really substantive set piece. It's but they're sort of talking about getting all these money from all these rich and powerful people, and keeping the cover of the NGO. And I'm not sure how. It doesn't speak well of the Mexican press in this film, because I think a little probing would would probably figure out who Emilia Pérez really is, or certainly question why she knows the places of all these murderers, or who to talk to, and where the bodies are. I think it's kind of like a little plot hole for me, I guess, that no one would be on to Emilia Pérez.
See, I would counter-argue this film doesn't really happen in the real world, does it? It's a kind of heightened stage musical, sort of pretend Disney-fied version of Mexico.
I thought it was a real one. I'm sorry. I guess I missed that part.
I really enjoyed that scene at the charity dinner,
where
it's just Zoe Saldana just doing dancing kind of on her own. She has her own little solo song.
Yeah.
She's the only person dancing where everybody else is frozen in a tableau.
Yeah, that's right.
I think she's a dynamite dancer. She's just great. I looked it up. She's 46, and she's still very flexible. I thought she was doing great.
Yoga and Pilates.
I've never seen her dance in anything before. Yeah. I'm guessing she must have. I guess when you go to drama school, you learn dancing and singing the same way you learn acting, don't you? I guess.
Absolutely.
But I thought she was dynamite. I thought she was great. I'd love to see her do more singing and dancing roles.
Another scene that I thought was great was when Emilia's lover sort of introduced. Is it Epifania?
Epiphania.
Epiphania.
I think is what I've written down in my notes.
Epiphania. You mentioned this. She's coming to see if her husband's alive, and she's bringing this gun into Emilia Pérez's office, and that's fantastic. There's tension because, of course, she knows that this is Manitos, and she's gonna off him. And it turns out that she's happy that he's dead, and then Emilia Pérez shows Epifania her gun, which is even bigger, and there's some sexual innuendo there too. But it's just a wonderful way of how these women come together over combating or outing the violence imposed upon them by men, and then by the end, another there are women heavies in this movie, which you don't see very often. But when it comes to time where they have to go rescue Emiliana Pérez, who's been kidnapped by Gustavo Mora and beaten up. So then we go old school, and Rita knows how to put the old band back together, and they get lots of guns. But there are a number of women in the gang, and they are just as heavily armed as the rest. So it's a nice nice surprise of expectations, or change of expectations, to see the women kind of in charge, even when the shootout is going to happen.
It is. It's the moment when the film turns into Sicario or something, doesn't it? For 10 minutes. It's almost like it's impossible to make a film in Mexico or about Mexico without having a lot of automatic weapons. So there is an absolute blaze of gun violence, and then kind of a lot of the characters all die in a big fireball at the end of the movie. It's probably worth touching on the opening and closing images. So you did mention that the opening image for the film is a mariachi band. Yeah, which I can understand why that might make you grit your teeth. But I took that as the film setting out its stall, because it's a mariachi band, isn't it? But they're wearing like really, really traditional, old-fashioned, sparkly outfits, and they're decorated with fairy lights. Yes. So I took that as saying that the film is telling you, we're going to watch a film which is a musical, but it is a sort of glammed up glitter ball version of Mexico. Yeah. I think that's what that opening shot is telling you. Because anyway, that mariachi band, they never turn up again. It's not like it's little a little
bookended or.
Yeah, exactly. It's like not their kind of they're promising that they will return.
Yeah, foreshadowing or something. Yeah,
that's the word I'm looking for. It's not like foreshadowing or whatever. It's just you get they turned up for one day, they did one shot, they left. The closing image really reminded me of the end of Journey to Italy. Yeah, insofar as there is a parade and people are singing a song and walking after an icon through the streets. I'm not entirely sure what that closing image says, except that maybe, I wrote in my notes here, it suggests that death is inevitable and our lives are the sum of the people that we have touched. I think that's kind of what it's saying. So a bit different to this opening idea that, come to the Glitterball Mexico. So, maybe it's not entirely unified. It doesn't have that neatness of opening and closing with similar ideas, but I think that's what they're getting at.
I think, given the nature that there's a parade in the streets of Mexico, it could be that the same mariachi band is in that crowd.
Maybe
that could be bookended. For me, though, that it's this reverence of Emilia as a savior towards the end, and for me, it was this sort of misremembering of history. That's how I took it. It's like I wrote for theme, and you've already talked about it more eloquently than I, but I wrote, a tiger can change its gender, but it can't change its stripes. So that you can't really change. I think that you've made that very clear in the other arcs of the story. But it's that doesn't mean that tiger can't be seen as a tiger, I guess, or be remembered that way. So I think it's kind of like this misremembering it. We remember Emiliana as being this person who brought closure to a lot of Mexican families torn apart by drug violence, and yet we misremember her because Manitos del Monte it seemed like a drug dealer. I don't know what his criminal business was, but it's like we're kind of, it's being glossed over. It's being whitewashed. It's like a piece of history being whitewashed, I think, personal history, which extends into the public sphere.
Right. Yep.
But I thought of Voyage to Italy, and I also I was shocked that there was this sort of statue of Emiliana, I think it is, that you said icon, they're sort of carrying through the streets, because that seems maybe a bit much, but and I guess it
maybe a bit much. That's what they could put on the poster, frankly, for every scene in this film.
I was going to say, maybe a bit much, but not too much. Like this reminded me of a Baz Luhrmann film, but Baz Luhrmann under restraints, less being shackled somehow. So not doing all the Baz Luhrmann stuff, but definitely having learned what to do and what not to do.
It's read that Baz Luhrmann guide to cinema, hasn't it? You're exactly right. Good observation. I don't know whether one of the other things I've read in the coverage of the film is that trans people may be angry with the film insofar as hey, we have representation of a trans person on the big screen, but it turns out they're broadly a fairly evil person who's murdered a lot of others. I'm not entirely sure whether I feel like it's justified. Maybe. I mean, I understand that. The film does portray a trans character who kind of I think they express the feeling of not feeling at home in their own body very articulately, I think.
Yeah.
So that's interesting, but otherwise they're just a person like anybody else. They're still just a product of their environment.
Yeah.
We don't see trans people in cinema very much.
No.
So it doesn't necessarily mean then that when one does turn up, they should be a Mary Sue.
I would say again, though, this is where I think the film fails a little bit because, we meet Manitas del Monte. He's in the film for maybe 2 or 3 scenes at most, something like that.
Yeah, about that.
And you don't see the struggle. I mean, they talk about it a little bit, but you don't really see. You don't see the Emilia Pérez in him, I don't think. So you don't see him struggling. It's not like he's less violent than the average gang member, or that he has the Emiliana Pérez sensibilities at all. It seems like, for me, it felt a little bit more like, and this might have been an interesting plot as well. But I don't think they go one way or the other. It might have been interesting that he's in such bad trouble that his only way out is to do something that would be really uncomfortable for him, but maybe he could do it. Which is changing gender. That might have been another angle, but you don't see that much of the Emilia Pérez in the Montes character, Manitos de Monte. And then later on, you don't. It's a very, as I said, it's a very quick transition. So you don't see that character change or those life changes that you have to go through, and the new abuse you've got to suffer when you've made that change. So I think on both sides, you don't really get the sense of how necessary that was, or was that really part of the story for that character? It didn't feel super authentic, and I think it was just because it wasn't explored on either side of the transition.
Okay, yeah, maybe there would be a better way to kind of explore that.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you, again, as resident Spanish language expert, the NGO that they formed to try and find the bodies of the disappeared is called La Lucecita, I think. And I was going to ask you, what does that mean?
I would translate it as the little light.
The little light,
yeah, like the shining light on some darkness and uncovering some truth. I guess that's how I would.
But only a little light, not a big one.
Yeah, it's not like a luz grande. It's a lucita. When you put the iti on the end, it's sort of a diminutive. So you'd say like the little light.
I was going to ask whether there was some kind of interesting Spanish language pun which I did not understand in this name. But
I'd have to think about it. No, I don't think so. No.
Right, okay.
Well, the pun is on his name, I think, isn't he? He's Manitas del Monte, which is kind of like Manitas would be little hands, but Monte is obviously large, like a mountain. Like, The Hands of the
Okay.
Mountain, or The Little Hands of the Mountain. I don't know if that was, those early scenes where the gang is kind of hanging out in the desert. It seems like northern Mexican, sort of somewhat mountainous territory, but I wasn't sure if that was that's what they called him, and he was from the mountains, and that's why he got this name of Las Manitas de Monte. But I think, again, more backstory on that might have helped the story.
He's gone from little hands to little light.
There's the arc right there. That's all the arc you need. All the character arc you need is right there. I mean, one thought I had on this was, I know you and I are probably the only ones who enjoyed Folie à Deux, but I think in the music, those were good songs. They'd taken these classics, these standards, and then I guess Lady Gaga wrote a song, and they subverted them in a way that they had some kind of relevance in the film. Whereas I didn't think it's hard to write songs for a movie and a musical. I understand that, but I don't think any of the songs were they weren't that snappy, that weren't that catchy. I don't think they may have given a little exposition. I don't remember them well enough, but they seemed like underbaked somehow, and I think that doesn't help the film. And I think, again, it could have been stronger if you just decide, hey, we're going to do this. It's going to be gritty. It's going to be edgy. People are going to have a hard time with it, but it's not going to be softened out by these musical scenes, and or it's just not going to be as long. Maybe that might have helped too.
Yeah. I mean, you're right that I cannot remember a single one of the songs. I couldn't hum you a tune or sing you a line. But there's one other thing. Seeing as the NGO is called The Little Light.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of play about light in this film. There was a scene which I only picked up on the second time of watching the movie, which is when Jessie returns to the US and she phones up Gustavo, her old lover. And as he picks up the phone or she leaves a message for him or something like that, the first time she hears his voice, the light changes and it goes from being kind of cold to suddenly this warm yellow light fills the room, which feels a little bit like, a comment on, there's like that common Mexico filter that's used on, any film or television program where they need to demonstrate that the characters are now in Mexico, even though they're still filming it in the same little bit of California that they were in 5 minutes ago. So suddenly all the light becomes really, really yellow and hot. Yeah. And I'm guessing they're kind of making a comment on that the idea is that, Mexico is basically a dimmer switch and you can just twist it a little bit clockwise and now suddenly you've got Mexico. Yeah. They do kind of do quite a lot of playing with light, isn't it? I think that's probably intended to be a theme in the movie, not just calling the NGO the Little Light, but also the way that they're kind of playing with light in a lot of the scenes. Yeah. The shaking chandelier during the earthquake, and the little points of light in that big kind of song about discovering the disappeared. I think that's probably quite important, although what it says, I don't know.
Well, look at every scene with Manitos del Monte is basically in the dark or in the dark in the desert. And there's there's some plays with lights when their kids are looking at candles or something like that out in the desert. But it's every scene with Emilia as a man in the opening act is dark. Yeah, and then it brightens up quite a bit when we get to her mansion in Mexico later on. It's sunny and warm, and all those scenes have plenty of light. So it's definitely it sort of underscores the arc of the character. Yeah.
Because there's a scene, isn't it, where she has a cuddle with her son. He kind of says, "Oh, the smell reminds me of my father." Yes. And he has one of those sort of little lamps that projects stars all over the ceiling. Yep. So I mean, they are trying to. They're working hard on these visual motifs. I think it's broadly successful. It works. I tell you something else that works, and you've been alluding to them many, many times before I finally dropped a dime. I tell you who's got quite a lot of work this week, and that's the Cliche Squad. Yeah, Cliche Squad. This is one of those films where I'm prepared to forgive it a lot because I find it deliberately camp and soap opera-y. So I think it's kind of deliberately weighing in on those cliches. It's enjoying, relishing them, I think. But there are quite a lot of cliches. The main one being that basically everything that happens in Mexico is drug and gang violence related. There is no other kind of Mexican economy of any kind. There is no other industry. There is no other job. Everybody there is drug and gang violence employed.
Yes, I mean that's it. That kind of speaks the entire film. But I think it's also just that it depends so much on those to actually generate the story and the story world and the characters' actions and motivations. It also has car explosions, by the way. So that's,
It does. Yes, it obeys that fundamental rule. Any car involved in an accident must explode.
eventually.
After lying still for 5 seconds.
Exactly.
Yes.
The real question is, it's not like that other one because this one waited 5 seconds and that was only 3 seconds. It's more believable somehow, or more incredible. Yeah, definitely. There are a number. I mean, I think it's certainly a condemnation, and perhaps the Mexican judicial system's not very good. But I think there's definitely there's a lot of developing world cliches throughout in terms of exactly that, how people are making a living or what the streets look like. You do see wealth with Emilia Pérez, but it's dirty money, and she has this mansion. That's the only way to get wealthy in Mexico, it seems, or that's one of the I think cliches that drives it.
Right.
That opening scene, I thought, another way to introduce the character is really to have her represent him and then be surprised later on that Manitos is now a woman. I think that would have been an interesting thing, but we are taken through the first 10 minutes of this. She's getting this other character, this man who's committed violence against his wife, and they're changing the story so that, she committed suicide. So there's a sort of a cliche of just the entire, Banana Republic justice or something like that is a bit uncomfortable. And sadly, violence against women is not a cliche, but it's definitely used here. And I think that's intentional, though. I mean, it's intentional because this story is really about empowered women, as we've already discussed. So it's a little bit of revenge there, but it's, you start out on the wrong foot because it's, they just got another scumbag off. And so I guess I would have made that scumbag at the beginning Manitos, because that way we would get some insight into the character automatically and we wouldn't be wasting time on the case.
Yes.
And then I would say that maybe she has a hand in the process, but I think it's much better if she's surprised later on by this being Emilia Pérez now, and she's being thanked for getting this other guy off, and then just kind of leading it on a little bit so that she has to do some puzzle making to figure it all out. Mariachis.
That's a very cute idea. Actually. You should have been in on the pitch meeting for this.
I think again, like with so many films, there's a better film in here, or even a great film in here, but I think there's some very big and to me obvious mistakes or missteps that actually weaken it as opposed to strengthen it.
Yeah. As usual, I've watched this film fairly uncritically with a big smile on my face and not thought about it too hard. Because I had a great time. I enjoyed it enough, to watch it twice and still enjoy it the second time.
And I've been characteristically negative about it, pessimistic, curmudgeonly. You've made me like it a little bit more and appreciate it a little bit more, but I still like that second film we watched better.
Well, why don't we have a break? Emilia Pérez is streaming on Netflix, and will be interesting to see how it does at the Oscars next week. We'll have a little break, and then we will come back and we will go back to Mexico. In fact, we will step backwards and forward across the border about 20 times. Yeah. Because we're also going to watch Touch of Evil. This week's episode of the Two Real Cinema Club is sponsored by Auto Incognito. We're surrounded by logos, and we all know that a logo is more than just a brand, it's a whole identity. You might be Honda for life, you might be Ferrari through and through, but sometimes a brand can go from cool to less cool fast, and that's when you need Auto Incognito. Imagine you've bought an electric car, only to realise that the business is run by an out-and-out Nazi. Or perhaps you've put in an order for an angular truck that looks like it was designed by a 5-year-old with a ruler, and then discover that the proprietor is dismantling the federal government while forwarding memes and posing with a chainsaw. Well, now you can order a pack of Auto Incognito stickers, and very soon you'll be driving an AOC La. Now you're pollution-free without having to pollute your social media with Nazi edgelords. Spend half an hour in some elbow grease and your angular all-terrain vehicle can become a Bernie truck. Yes, it'll still be ugly, but at least it will be politically excusable. Or get truly serious and send off for our full service pack with stickers for the exterior, interior, dashboard, steering wheel, lights and fenders, and transform your $80,000 fascist-adjacent car into a $5,000 banger that nobody will key in a Starbucks drive-thru. A few stickers might seem like a lot of work now, but compared to washing off a lifetime of graffiti as random passers-by spray paint swastikas on your vehicle, it's a breeze. When remorse turns into embarrassment and you're hoarse from telling everyone that you voted for someone else, turn to auto incognito. Because sometimes being invisible is better than having to explain yourself to everyone.
Yes. Sign me up. Send me things.
Someone at work was saying that she drives a Tesla and she's very, very proud of it. She's not so proud.
Yeah. I now have a Bernie rubber bumper sticker on my car, and I am proud. And the resistance starts here right now on the Two Reel Cinema Club. Get your stickers.
Resist.
It all starts with stickers. All you need is stickers for a resistance. That's what I find. But we are going to talk about another film. I'm just so excited about the resistance that I can't contain it. We watched Touch of Evil.
Yeah.
Which was a James Rosica masterstroke. Why on earth did we watch Touch of Evil?
Do you have any other questions for me, counsel?
So you're exactly right. I did choose this one.
Yes.
And frankly, I feel like it's like any excuse to watch Touch of Evil,
Yeah.
isn't it? I think, because you latched onto it the moment I suggested it. So I think any film about Mexican crime,
Yeah.
in my head, naturally leads to Touch of Evil.
Yeah.
So a good excuse to watch it again. Orson Welles. So I read David Thompson's biography of Orson Welles a few years ago. He was a tricky, challenging figure and who did not get on well with studio executives. And so partly as a result of that, there just aren't that many films with his name on.
That's right.
Not compared to the facility with which he made films. So I think what little oeuvre we have, we should celebrate. So great opportunity to revisit Mexico, rewatch Touch of Evil.
Yeah.
When was the first time you watched it, do you think?
Early 90s, probably. It's kind of library films. I think we watched it in London, because I have a question for you. I hope I did not remember this the way I remember it, but there's a
yes.
There's a lecturer there,
Right.
who we sometimes watched films with. I think one time he came into our class to tell us what terrible writers we were, but he would show films and talk kind of the way we do, ad nauseum about them in a lecture environment. And he suggested to me that the opening scene, which is famous and famously imitated, I guess, was shot on an actual dolly track where there were workers on either side pulling the dolly and all the apple boxes on that the dolly might have been on away as the camera brought the foreground into focus. So they had to work feverishly to pull away the track so that they wouldn't be seen in the shot as they were panning back or pulling back.
Oh.
Now, do you remember him telling that story? I'm not going to say any names.
I don't remember that story, though it sounds fairly plausible.
It sounds ridiculous to me because I think the camera's there's a crane on a truck, which makes it a lot easier. And I don't think you could ever pull that shot off. It would take weeks to practice it. And then you'd have to have a huge crew. So maybe I'm wrong. I don't know if that came up in the book or not. But for me, that opening shot, which is now famous, it's got to be a crane on a truck, in the back of a truck. I don't see any other way to do it. I don't know why you would do it on a dolly, but maybe I'm wrong.
It probably is on a truck. I mean, I watched that opening shot 3 or 4 times this week, actually, and it does wobble around a bit. I suspect it's on a truck.
Yeah, exactly.
I did read a little bit about the background of Touch of Evil.
Mm-hmm.
So Charlton Heston was coming off the back of the Ten Commandments. So he was absolutely the height of his fame at this point. Universal wanted him to make this film, which is based on the book Badge of Evil, which had sold fairly well. Heston wanted to do the film. There was already a script written by Paul Monash, who was a television writer with lots and lots of credits. And Universal asked Orson Welles to play Quinlan, the antagonist. And Charlton Heston said, but Orson Welles, maybe he could direct too. So Welles said that he would do it if he could also rewrite the script. Universal agreed that he could write, direct, and act, but only he would get the acting fee, but they wouldn't pay him any more.
Oh, wow, yeah.
So he did a rewrite in 10 days, apparently. He wanted to shoot it in Mexico. Universal said, no, you've got to stay close to the home. So the whole film was shot largely in Venice, Los Angeles, for its beautiful decay, apparently. So, I mean, you can tell watching it carefully that it's full of those Orson Welles hallmarks. There's lots of ceiling shots, lots of deep focus, lots of long takes.
Yep.
Welles was already big at this point, but then wore more padding, a lot of heavy makeup, a false nose, eye bags, making him even more grotesque. Apparently, during the filming, he used to go to friends' dinner parties, still wearing his makeup to shock people when he turned up.
Yeah.
But when it came out, the studio hated it. Universal were bewildered by it. It was too perverse, too dark, too strange. So they did their own cut, which Welles hated. But Welles left a 58-page memo, which described exactly the way that he had seen the film. When it was released in 1958, it performed pretty poorly in the States, found an audience in Europe. In the end, it came to be seen as one of the last great noir pictures. In 1998, Walter Murch made a new cut of the film following Orson Welles' memo. I wrote in my notes here, there are not many household name editors, are there? Basically, there's two. There's Walter Murch and there's Thelma Shoemaker, isn't it?
Yeah.
I can't think of any other editors off the top of my head. Those guys do not make the front page. But so Walter Murch edited this new version together. Bit of trivia, which I did not realise, and maybe you did. Janet Leigh had a broken arm in plaster during filming.
Oh.
When you know that, you can see it. It's really obvious. But when you don't know it, she hides it very well. But even in that opening shot, you can see it. She never moves her left arm.
Oh.
She's just kind of holding it by her side. It's in plaster, but you can't tell.
Oh, my. No, I didn't
very
notice
well
that.
disguised.
Yeah.
Now, so I saw the new Walter Murch cut this time.
Okay.
I think I'd seen the 1 minute 35 Universal cut before. So this is the first time that I saw the 1 hour 50-minute Murch cut. Which version did you watch this week?
I definitely watched the 1 hour 35. Yeah, I didn't see the Murch cut. Huh. I saw it because I think it's on Max here, HBO Max. Okay. So that's what I saw. So Walter Murch got the original rushes? He had the original film?
I think there was old footage which they had, which they were able to restore.
Wow.
I think there was some fiddling about with the soundtrack, but the footage was already there.
Interesting.
Spoilers, I thought it was pretty great. Shall I tell you the story of Touch of Evil?
You don't need to tell me. I know this one pretty well after I've seen it probably half a dozen times. So tell the other ones. I mean, I'm just going to...
I'll tell the other ones.
Yeah, I'm going to turn off my headphones here.
So, Touch of Evil is a noir detective thriller set on the US-Mexican border. When a construction magnate and his girlfriend are blown up in a car bomb as they cross the border, the Mexican and the American police are interested. On the Mexican side, Ramon Vargas, played by Charlton Heston, a narcotics cop who has recently prosecuted one of the kingpins of the grandee Mexican crime family. He's on his honeymoon with his American wife Susie, played by Janet Leigh. While from the American side comes Hank Quinlan, a grotesque and racist detective who bears a grudge against Mexicans, played by director Orson Welles. The investigation begins, but Vargas suspects that Quinlan is planting evidence. But before he can stop Quinlan, Susie is under threat from the Grandy gang, and the whole case takes on a personal dimension. Will justice prevail? Will Susie be rescued? And will anyone remember the original crime by the time the film ends?
Very good point, because that's clearly not important.
I mean, yeah, it really is not, actually. I did manage to read the book this week. So happily, I read the book. The book is called Badge of Evil.
Badge of Evil, okay.
Which is like such a misstep. In the book, you get halfway through before it turns out that the story is really about a corrupt cop who is planting evil. But if you look at the front page of the book, it's called Badge of Evil. It's so obviously telegraphing that it's about a bad cop.
Yeah.
So it seems crazy that they string you along for half of the book, telling you that there's it's a bit of a mystery. Oh, really? Corrupt cop. Having read the book, this film, I think, is an absolute masterclass of adaptation, because the film takes basically all the most interesting fragments of the book and it throws away the rest. Yeah. So it just takes like a few interesting points, and then it raises the stakes, it amplifies the violence, amplifies the crime, the sex, it slims down the characters. It just gives the one that remains more depth, more ambiguity. So it's an excellent adaptation of a pretty middling book, frankly. Interestingly, in the book, the lead character, the prosecutor, is white. He's called Mitch Holt. His wife is Mexican, but he is like a white guy. And in the book, there's no car bomb, and there's an awful lot more investigation. They are much more interested in the actual crime in the book. And there's lots and lots of stuff that's thrown away. So Mitch Holt, he has a DA who's always trying to stop him. Quinlan isn't actually the corrupt cop. It's Quinlan's partner in the book who is corrupt. There's like a really big section. People keep shooting at Holt from outside his home. Holt gets the newspapers to publish stories about the corruption, but then they drop the story. All sorts of stuff happens in the book, which just gets completely trimmed out of the film. And the film is much better off without it. Yeah. But interestingly, the book doesn't really lean into the race angle nearly as much. So the book is much more interested in the crime. It's about detecting who it was who's committed this initial murder, whereas the film is really kind of not very interested in that.
No.
And the other thing to take home from the book, actually, is that you read the book and it really demonstrates how people in Hollywood don't like to read, because the book has a great opening page. And I suspect a lot of people just read that first page and thought, we'll make a film out of this. And then probably didn't read most of the rest of the book. So in the very beginning of the book, Lineker, who is the guy who is murdered at the beginning of the film, he is at his home. He's waiting for his daughter to come by for dinner, and he just sees somebody drop a stick of dynamite into his apartment through an open window. And there's just kind of this moment where you can see his thought process as he's looking at the ground and saying, that looks like a stick of dynamite. Yeah. And then the whole house blows up. It's a really great, no pun intended, explosive first page. But the rest of it is a bit by the numbers. So, the book is fine. And they keep a few bits from the book, but largely it's a exciting first page, and then otherwise have at it. I think they've got rid of lots and lots of stuff, and it's better for them.
I wonder what that first draft was before Welles got to it. If it was closer to the book, or if that's really Welles as a writer who's making it a much better script.
Apparently, according to David Thompson, I think Welles probably kept more of Paul Monish's script than he admitted to. So I think Paul Monish had probably already done quite a bit of the trimming down. Yeah. But what Welles did, he did invent a few characters. So I think he wanted Marlene Dietrich to be in the movie, so he just wrote a part for her. Yeah. And her role is, kind of irrelevant to the film. Really. It is, but it's great fun, and it's always enjoyable to watch her.
Amazing, and I was amazed to see that she was 57 years old in this film, because she looks kind of half that age, and she definitely, she's sort of the brothel operator, and she's still got it. She's still got it. It's amazing. So it's an interesting turn, but I do have that on my notes. Like, why is Marlene Dietrich in this film? I think she was friendly with Orson Welles, and I think he probably just really wanted to have her in the film. So I think that's all you need. And obviously that's another pretty big name to bring to it. I mean, at this time, Janet Leigh, Charlton Heston, Orson Welles, and Marlene Dietrich, that's going to sell a film all on its own. But I think both Gabors are in this film. Is that right? Ava Gabor and Zsa Zsa Gabor, maybe?
Oh, Zsa Zsa Gabor is in it. Is Ava Gabor in it as well?
I thought they were both in it. Then again, I can barely tell the difference. You've seen one Gabor, you've seen them all, I think. But it's definitely an all-star cast. But Charlton Heston in brown face, how do we feel about that 70 years later?
So it looks particularly weird and uncomfortable now. And most of the dialogue about the film these days, it really concentrates about how Charlton Heston is so miscast.
Yeah.
But I mean, I don't think he's bad. As an actor, he has some presence, but not much range.
Yeah.
He is very heavily made up.
Yeah.
I mean, strangely more made up in some scenes than he is in others. It's not very consistent.
Yeah.
I am prepared to shrug and say, well, it's a product of the times.
Yeah.
But I do realize that as a white person, that is me exercising my privilege. So, it's not really up to me whether I should sort of shrug and accept that.
Yeah.
Not really my business. How do you feel about it?
It's weirdly appropriate, I think, because the bigotry is so open that it feels like it's a very honest film of the racism of the times. So it feels appropriate because it's already kind of a mess in terms of that. But I was wondering, they may have been reluctant to hire a more like a Mexican character, a Mexican actor, or someone who would have pulled it off a lot better. He speaks a little bit of Spanish in this film, and it's not very good, of course. But I was wondering if they felt more comfortable, because he receives quite a heap of abuse. I'm wondering if they were more comfortable heaping that abuse on an A-list actor. And, oddly enough, Charlton Heston was willing to take it. He comes out as the hero. I mean, he's definitely the better of the two characters. But it is, it's oddly appropriate, I guess, maybe. I don't know. But I think you're right. You have to sort of say that's the times. But I felt like, I think the racism was so overt that it felt to me like a critique of, American attitudes towards anything south of the border. So I hope I'm right on that. Because the Quinlan character is just reprehensible. But it's shot really well. I mean, in the sense that there's this early cockfight. I call it a cockfight. It's like when Welles and Heston as Quinlan and Vargas are sort of warring over who gets this crime. And ultimately the crime is meaningless because no one cares about it. It's like this big MacGuffin in the first act, basically. There's a lot of just sort of pacing around and feeling each other out. And it's just this cockfight between these two investigators. And you sense the evil. It's more than a touch, to be honest, in the Welles character. And for me, one of the masterstrokes in this film also is just Welles' acting. The degeneration of his character is wonderful, and he starts sweating more. He looks like hell over the course of the story, and he just embodies this really, really evil character perfectly. And within that, the arc is going from bad to really, really, really bad, and he does it wonderfully. I think he's doing it gleefully. He must have had a great time with his part, but because I think you said that Heston was originally planning to play the Quinlan character. Is that right?
No. Heston was always going to play the good guy cop.
Okay, but okay, so Welles really wanted to play Quinlan. It sounds like.
Yeah, but originally it was his character was Mitch Holt. So I think originally he was a white guy, not a Latino guy.
Okay, that makes good sense.
David Thompson describes Orson Welles as looking like he's been dipped in chicken fat in this film. It looks kind of he's so shiny and sweaty, and especially in that early scene. I know we were talking about resisting earlier, that I could not help but be reminded by Orson Welles playing Hank Quinlan of a current prominent politician. Because he's this very, very large character. He's kind of lumbering along. He makes these sort of snide, sneering jokes. He's kind of smugly arrogant. He is transparently racist.
Yeah.
You watch this film in 2025, and it's difficult not to be reminded of somebody that we see in the news all the time.
Yeah. Yep.
And it's disappointing that we are 70 years on from this film, and yet continue to sing the same song.
Yeah. The more things change, the more they don't change.
Well, they don't change. Watching it again this time, I was really surprised at how incredibly beautiful this film is.
Yeah.
I think the photography is just amazing.
Yeah.
The faces, the composition. Constantly watching this film, I was just kind of open-mouthed, asking myself, how did they film this?
Yeah.
This incredible deep focus photography that has people right next to the camera.
Yeah.
And then they walk off into the distance and everything still stays in focus.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I was reading about the shoot, and apparently the first scene that they shot was the scene in the apartment where I think it's Sanchez, who's the guy who in this film ends up being the person who, as an afterthought, is the person who committed the murder at in the beginning of the movie. But this very first scene, apparently it's 13 pages of dialogue, and it's all done in a single tracking shot. It's 4 minutes and 18 seconds.
Wow.
And they shot this on the first day. Apparently Universal scheduling had said it was going to take 3 days to shoot this scene. Mm-hmm. And Orson Welles kind of mapped out all the camera moves, had grips who were moving the set around and getting rid of walls while they move the camera this way and that, and it goes into the bathroom and it shows you the box, and it goes back into the living room again, and you have more characters, and there's kind of 8 or 9 different characters, and they're all in focus, and they're all stepping into their mark and then stepping out of the frame again. And they got to the end of the day and they'd shot this 13-page scene in a single day, and they were already 2 days ahead of schedule now.
Wow.
And it's absolutely incredible. Technically, probably more impressive even than that very famous 3.5-minute opening shot with the crane and the bomb.
Yeah.
It's just remarkable filmmaking, and all of it looks so fantastic.
Yeah, with much more cumbersome equipment and obviously a fantastic focus puller too. I mean, it's a lot of
just
changing.
Incredible.
Yeah, it is bewildering. There are 2 shots that I would talk about in particular. I'll start with the lift shots. I'm glad that you mentioned it's a noir film, because there are these shots in the elevator when I guess everyone's going up to meet and leave the building, where Vargas is staying in this hotel without his wife for some reason. He's distracting all these people coming, these lawyers, basically, kind of investigators coming back and forth to brief him and argue with him or whatever. But there are these 2-3 shots in the lift, and it's one of these old elevators where they're like pulling the grate and all that. And then you've got these 3 characters facing the camera, so you don't have to do any coverage over someone's shoulder or close-ups or anything, because all 3 characters are just crammed into this space. So they got a camera in there too. I mean that's obviously probably not a true elevator, but it looks very realistic.
It does look realistic, yeah.
And you just get these, again, these moments of acting there, 15, 20, 30 seconds without a cut, and you're going up and down, but you're doing it in the noir style where you'd have both characters like facing the camera, so that you're not having to shoot multiple angles or anything like that. And they're just really well done. They're really, really well acted, but they look great. There's movement going on that's not it's not really camera movement, it's elevator movement. And then I think one of the characters doesn't go down, and then you get Orson Welles in the camera shot and the lift shot going down, and he's just taking up more space because he's this huge character. And they just have another conversation. So you're sort of getting these expositionary scenes, but you're not really paying much attention to the plot at this point. It's just, okay, there's planted evidence. Orson Welles is bad. He's going to do something bad. He's going to die eventually because he's such a badass. But they're just wonderfully filmed scenes. And in the old style, I guess. And then the other one, which is like a classic Welles thing, it's when Pete and or Wells's partner and Quinlan, the character played by Welles, are leaving the brothel, I think, for the last time. And Wells's character, Quinlan, is just drunk. He's in terrible shape. This is and Pete is trying to. He's been wired so that so Vargas can record their conversation. He can confess on tape that he killed the Grangie character. And it starts out super low. You're looking up at them. They're empowered characters. And as they move outside, it's up again, probably on a crane somehow, and they're moving it. And it goes from looking straight up and seeing ceiling and all that, which is one of the classic Welles moves. And then eventually the camera goes up and just looks down on this character and the two men together. It's a really swift movement. Again, all in focus, beautiful shot. And it's just... looks a little bit like showing off, honestly. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's great because it's showing him in his last sort of moments of power and respect, and then all of a sudden he's walking into this. I can't really explain it, but they're right next to an oil field. So there are all these oil derricks there and towers, and like you're drilling into the past somehow, I guess, and all this oil and dirt's going to come up at them, and they're walking out into there for the climax scene. But they're just a couple of just two examples of many, many hundreds. But I think those two scenes and the way they were shot really stood out to me.
God, it's magnificent. There's lots of mirrors in this film as well, aren't there?
Yeah.
It's not just ceilings, but many mirrors in this film, and they're all really skillfully used. Like in one of those very early scenes where Susie goes to see like the grandee gang boss, and in half of the scene we can we're looking at like the backs of some characters, but we can see their faces in the mirror as well.
Yeah,
it's just beautifully planned and set up, and every frame is like a magnificent photograph.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful. It's a very noir, isn't it? This film,
yeah,
because it's not just like those usual staples of noir films. It's not just crime, murder, sex, but it goes beyond that, doesn't it? It's voyeurism, it's drugs, rape. It's pretty shockingly explicit.
Yeah,
towards like I guess as the lead in for the third act. And it's really, really strung out this. So Susie is made to feel more and more uncomfortable. So she goes off to spend some time in a motel on her own, where she can supposedly be kind of safe and have a bit of peace and quiet. And then the grandee gang, scene by scene, gradually kind of move in closer and closer with the intention to presumably drug her.
Yep.
So I think for the purposes of the plot, they inject her with barbiturates, and then it's like supposedly they blow marijuana smoke over her to make it seem like she has been taking drugs. But the way that the scene is presented, it seems considerably more violent and sexual than that.
Yeah.
This is pretty shocking, pretty explicit stuff for a film made in 1958.
Exactly. Yeah.
You would have thought, I don't know, at some point Janet Leigh surely should learn the lesson: don't go to motels, because whenever she goes to a motel, it works out bad. Just don't go, Janet. Don't.
And people watching her. Also,
yes,
the grandee boys are watching.
God.
The Dennis Weaver part is really strange. He's also playing this sort of feeble-minded hotel clerk and cleanup person. It's very similar to this role he had on the television show Gunsmoke way back in the 50s. And it's a very weird character. I think it's supposed to be a comic foil or something like that. But given how dark and serious his scenes are, it's I don't know, it's disrupting. It's uncomfortable.
Yes, it's a strange tonal choice, isn't it?
Exactly.
I mean, everybody in the film is looking at Janet Leigh, aren't they? Because there's the guy with the torch watching her in the hotel window.
I love that
Dennis
one.
Weaver watching her through the window. There's the grandee gang, and also there is us in the audience. She has a lot of scenes where she's in some pretty racy underwear.
Yeah,
so we too are complicit in this voyeurism. She is very much presented for the male gaze, isn't she? Not just for the characters, but for we the audience also.
In an odd way too. There's something deceivingly innocent about the way she's harassed with flashlights. I mean, you think, okay, these guys are like teenagers shining light on her, or they're playing music, right? But there's a real sinister underbelly to the whole story and to those characters as well. If they're willing to inject her and they're trying to frame her for murder as a drug addict. So it's really dark, but there is a level of humor in this film where it's very dark humor. It's not laugh out loud humor at all. It's just like, what? It's like unbelievability humor. It's like, and I liked it. And
it's probably worth lingering on the music a little bit. I know we've barely talked about the script, haven't we? But worth lingering on the music. The opening scene, is more or less unchanged between the two versions of the film that I've seen, the 1 hour 35 and the 1 hour 50 version, except in the shorter version, there is a Henry Mancini soundtrack with this kind of this ticking motif and these kind of great sort of Mexican brass section. It's just, it's a really, really great opening tune, and the that long tracking shot plays over the actual credits.
Yeah.
In the merch edit, the redo, supposedly more similar to Welles's own vision, you don't get that Mancini opening tune. Instead, you just get like a sort of musique concrète version of wandering around a Mexican town. So all you hear is music from different car windows and different shops. Yep. And then you hear the sound of people on the streets and the donkeys or the goats or whatever that they walk past. It's like a sound collage.
Yeah.
And I think from that point of view, it's a far weaker opening.
Oh.
When you get the Mancini tune,
yeah.
You really feel like, this is something happening. This is the opening of a really exciting story. Whereas the sound collage doesn't have nearly the same impact. For the rest of the movie, there's a lot of really bright, blaring jazz, which I'm guessing is like the 1958 equivalent of like a pounding techno soundtrack, isn't it? It was probably relatively, avant-garde and happening, and pressingly modern and urgent as a soundtrack. Difficult to convey the sort of excitement that would have conveyed in 1958 when you watch it today.
I remember the very first time I saw this film being amazed by the music. There's something puzzling about it. I can't imagine people listening to that on the radio in that day and age. It's sort of this, it's almost like pre-rock and roll somehow, or, and it's all instrumental, isn't it? And you've got,
yes, I think so, yeah.
Some electric guitars and drums and all that, but you also have these horns, and it's nothing. I couldn't identify any of those artists, and I don't listen to any of that. So it's always been this sort of alien music to me. And the thing about Walter Murch is I think he was a sound editor before he was a film editor. Is that right? I think he started working in sound first. So you'd think that he would do some things to really punch up the story using sound. So if it's weaker, that's surprising. But you can't go wrong with a Henry Mancini soundtrack.
Yeah. I was saying earlier I couldn't remember a single song from Emilia Pérez, but I've got that Henry Mancini theme.
Oh, good, yeah.
From Touch of Evil going through my brain right now, and it's been there for 48 hours constantly on a loop. This film is kind of, we will probably get to this when we talk about the synthesis, but this film is explicitly about racism, isn't it? And it's all about the relations between Latinos and whites, and not just Charlton Heston and Janet Leigh, not just kind of Vargas and Susie, but Quinlan and Tanner, isn't it? Tanner, I think, is Marlene Dietrich's character, and also the guy who actually committed the murder, Sanchez, and his fiancée Marcia. So it's about this kind of these mixed race couples. I wonder whether does it kind of, is this film sort of anticipating a mixed race future for 1958 America? Is this film trying to say, this is the world that we live in now?
Yeah.
Get with it.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think 1958, it's pre-civil rights. I forget when the Supreme Court case was, but I think it's a couple years later. So yeah, there's a little bit of America, coming to accept this. When the Vargases, I guess they're newly married in the beginning of the film.
I think they are, yes.
Okay. When they're crossing the border, the American, I think they're going from Mexico into the United States at that point. I get confused because there's a lot of border crossing, as you said.
There is.
But when they're first crossing, I think, back into the U.S., the border agents seem surprised. Oh, Mrs. Vargas, you're married? So they're surprised, but they don't be belabored or anything like that. And perhaps, there's some sort of undercurrent of, well, this is an acceptable marriage because he's such a highfalutin prosecutor in Mexico or whatever. But I think it definitely preps the U.S. for interracial marriage.
And in a similar kind of nod to Progress, the scene where the Grandee gang turn up and they drug and we assume rape Susie.
Yeah.
They are led by it's a woman, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think is it Mercedes McCambridge, I think. is playing this woman who's another
Yes.
one of Orson Welles' regulars.
I think
And
you're
I
right.
was guessing, I'm quite prepared to be told wrong, that she appeared to me to be coded as a lesbian character in that scene.
Yes.
So in many ways, this feels, relatively progressive as a film that offers some representation of underrepresented groups.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see that come out in a 1958 film as well.
Yeah, and I think it's consistent with Wells as just being this totally deplorable, awful human being, and he's the most vocally racist, right? I mean, he's a bigot through and through, but he's just a grotesque character as well.
Yeah.
So I think it definitely, is definitely critical of some of the attitudes of the 50s going into the 60s, for sure.
The closing. So I know I harp on about this, but I'm still going to say it. The closing image of the film, is Marlene Dietrich, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
She's looking at the body of Hank Quinlan, Orson Welles' character, just floating in the river. And she says, like, this super quotable line, isn't it? He was some kind of a man. She says, "What does it matter what you say about people?"
Yeah.
And then she just walks off into the darkness. Like the kind of the opening image, this kind of long, complicated crane shot with, it starts out with a close up of the bomb and then it follows the car as it goes through town. I'm guessing suggests that this film is about the chaos that you see, where two countries collide. I'm guessing that's what that opening shot is trying to convey. Whereas the closing image seems to suggest that basically darkness is inescapable and inevitable. There's kind of something quite downbeat and dour about that ending. I suppose that's a fairly typical noir ending. That's part of the genre, isn't it? That at the end, there is no happy ending and there is no dawn. You start in darkness and you stay there.
Yeah, she's going deep into darkness. That's nowhere near her brothel, I don't think. It's kind of into that oil field set. And I think she's talking to Pete Menzies at the end, who he's sort of dying for maybe the second or third time, bleeding out. And I don't know if he says adios or she says adios, but I think that's basically how the film ends. And earlier in the film, they've said all border towns bring out the worst. And that's, kind of, I think it's kind of true, but it's an interesting story world piece, I think, to describe this area. And I think it's not clear. I always thought it was Tijuana clearly, but I think it's just sort of an invented place. It feels like it could be more of the Texas border than the California border, but I'm not really sure. And I think that's probably intentional. It's just a border town somewhere.
Yeah. It's generic border town. Well, thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yeah.
If you get the chance to see the 1 hour 50-minute cut, do, because I think it's I don't remember the 1 hour 35 very well, but the 1 hour 50 is fantastic. And it's rare that we come out and say that a film is better for being longer.
Yeah.
From the sublime to the ridiculous and back, maybe. Touch of Evil, what a fantastic experience. Before we try and bring the two films together, though, I am going to force you, while wearing a wire and wandering backwards and forwards over a rickety bridge, to play Who Am I? Who am I?
Oh man, that obsolete radio equipment you're using is not going to get a good recording of my Who Am I?
What is the point of using a radio when you have to be 3 feet away from the microphone for it to work?
I love seeing the old technology in films because it's just it's humorous, but it's awesome too. It's just fantastic. Let's see. Well, I know that you're going to be. There's a coroner played by Joseph Cotton, a very small role.
Yes,
so
uncredited Joseph Cotton who turns up in.
I want to leave the doctors, so the Israeli doctor I want to leave all the doctors to you, so that you have that option. I felt mostly like Pete Menzies, who is Quinlan, Orson Welles' partner, I guess, in investigation, and he's kind of just an average Joe partner, but he's, he starts getting suspicious of Wells, and he's really, he's a good guy in the end. He kind of comes over to Vargas's side a little bit and admits that there's enough evidence, and then cooperates. And then, I don't know, I like the fact that he takes a bullet. He's dead for several minutes. And then somehow, miraculously, just at the right moment, he comes back to do a solid for Vargas by shooting Wells when Wells is about to kill Vargas. And then he gets that last moment with Marlene Dietrich, which is great. But I think the reason I feel like him a lot is because as a teacher, you don't always feel the gratitude. And it's wonderful the way Vargas just leaves Pete to die, jumps in a car with his wife, and drives off. And I had that Pete Menzies feeling. I get it often at school, so I'm going with Pete Menzies.
I spotted someone in the other film that I identify with. So I think if I identify with anybody this week, it's Rita Mora, the Zoe Saldana character. Insofar as it's like I just recognise that kind of that exasperated look when you have to do too much work for somebody who doesn't appreciate anything that you do. When I was early in my career as a doctor, I certainly worked for a couple of bosses who basically they only had two modes. Either they would demand things from you at unreasonable times of the day or night, it didn't matter, or they would shove a bag over your head and threaten to kill you. They were their two modes of interaction.
Yep.
And so I thought, I've definitely been there. Yep. So that is the life of a trainee doctor right there.
Oh, man.
Well, okay. We made a couple of trips to Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if we can bring the pages of the brochure together and see whether we can do our synthesis. So I think if you watch these two films back to back, I'm not sure that either of them make Mexico look like a popular tourist destination.
No, which is funny because it's a great place for tourism. Yeah, it's a good place to go. Jeez.
If you watch these films, basically you come away thinking that Mexico is the place where everything is dangerous, where everyone is corrupt, everyone will cut you open for a $5 bill. But kind of similarly, both of these films are sort of self-conscious about that notion. So I think both films are kind of about prejudice. Yeah, I think. I mean, Touch of Evil is explicitly about anti-Mexican racism. Yeah, Welles, specifically rewrote the script to emphasize that angle on the story. And then, Emilia Pérez, it explores. Well, I guess it kind of explores anti-trans sentiment, though that's kind of not its focus really. But it does sort of lift like the lid on that a bit. Agreed.
It's about drugs. Both films are about drugs, I think. No question about that in some way. Both films are about explosions. But explosions at very different times. I think that's a big difference. Like the explosion at the beginning of Touch of Evil sort of gets the story going. You think it's going to be more about that and that case, and it's not. So it's a nice little MacGuffin. Whereas I think Emilia Pérez builds up to an explosion that by the end it seemed like a cliche. I think we've mentioned that. But they both use an explosion. It's just very interesting to see them at the different points. You don't see. I mean, now you see explosions everywhere. I guess. Gosh, judging by the state of the world, you'd think you could go out to a street corner and you'd see an explosion if you sat there long enough. But you don't often see them in the beginnings of film so much. It's more about setting up story world and what. So I think probably especially at that time that was pretty jarring to see in the movie theater. It's like an explosion with a couple right there in the car. I mean, it's a violent explosion, and this married couple seeing it. They're about to kiss, aren't they? I think yes. Vargas and his wife are going in to kiss, and then in the background, boom. So it's got the sexual heat as well. It's very funny.
Just like the whole film is kind of about this kind of anticipated consummation, which never happens, isn't it?
Exactly.
They can never quite get that.
Yeah, I mean, the storyline seems like it's maybe 72 hours, maybe 4 or 5 days at most. It seems it's pretty compressed storyline. Yeah. I think there are a couple big differences. And I think it's mostly about story world. When you think of Touch of Evil, it's a set, right? I mean, it's one town. You don't know if you're in the U.S. or in Mexico at times, but it's a really contained location. Whereas I think there's a lot of globe hopping and globe trotting in Emilia Pérez, which I think waters the film down a little bit, because I didn't really get a whole lot from the scene in Thailand or the scene in Israel. Or going to Switzerland briefly, or being in London for one scene where you're in a restaurant. You know, you're not using the location at all. So I think that's a major difference between the two. A real similarity that has struck me in our conversation is like these character arcs just don't go anywhere, really. I think that's totally true for Welles' character. I mean, he gets worse and worse, but he's a bastard at the beginning, and he just proves he's a bastard throughout the film, and then he dies a bastard. So, I mean, it's like you can still tell a story without the classic character arc of redemption or going over to the wrong side, the dark side, or something like that. So it's interesting that everyone's storylines in both films they're fairly flat. They have some moments, but they're pretty flat. Vargas' character doesn't really change a whole lot either. So I think, that's
good
something.
Point.
I don't know if you feel the same way about that, but for me, I think it's fairly flat, and a lot of it is about not changing. These films are, as much as the Emilia Pérez character goes through this massive change, there's a lot of not changing in the thematic nature of both films.
Yeah, I mean, maybe both of these films are sort of about how you can't escape who you are, however much you might change your kind of appearance. I mean, so yeah, Emilia Pérez says she has this kind of gender affirming surgery, doesn't it?
Yeah.
So which does exactly that. It doesn't purport to change you. It confirms who you are.
Yeah.
One of the things that I came away from Touch of Evil was thinking that Quinlan in Touch of Evil, it kind of is a lot like Welles himself.
Yeah.
Insofar as both the character and the actor are sort of unable to defeat their demons. They're both kind of fighting a losing battle with their own vices.
Yeah.
There's this the closing line in Touch of Evil. Quinlan was a great detective and a lousy cop. And Welles was like a great detective but a lousy Hollywood player.
Yeah.
So he kind of wasn't really able to kind of play the studio system and get people on board and make the films that he could have made, because he would just sort of cheese everybody off. There's So that is kind of something that, again, I keep referring to David Thompson's book, but he points out that the thing which catches Quinlan out in his when he murders Grandy in Touch of Evil is his cane, and it's his cane that he is kind of what curses him. In the same way that Citizen Kane is the film that kind of cursed Orson Welles' career, because he was never quite able to top it.
Yeah.
It became more of a burden than a badge of pride.
Yeah.
Speaking of badges, I did write here in my little list of quotes. There's a quote from Badge of Evil, the book that Touch of Evil is based on. He writes, "As any American jury knows, it is the foreign born that cause all our crime and vice." I mean, the character in the book is saying this ironically. I think this is Mitch Holt, who's the prosecutor in the book. So he's pointing out the racism that he's encountering because his wife is Mexican.
Yeah.
But I did read that and kind of think, well, aren't we still there though?
Yeah.
Touch of Evil was made 23 years after the end of the Second World War, so people still vividly remembered the shadow of fascism. And today I'm worried, have we forgotten all that now? Is this notion that foreigners are the big problem, has that just become an accepted truth now for some people? Are we really not questioning this anymore?
Yep, these themes resurface or never go away entirely, for sure.
Yeah, these never go away. Oh man, this is disappointing.
Well,
great.
Great. Yeah. Did you see any other movies? Maybe we could do that one where we talk about the other what's also playing in this theater.
Let's talk about what else is playing at this theater. Yeah. So we saw something very different this week. We watched Memoir of a Snail, which it's an Australian stop frame animation made by Adam Elliott. It's a film about two siblings separated after the death of their father, sent to different adoptive families.
That's right. Yeah.
Many miles away, and it's like if you want to describe it to someone, it's an Australian Tim Burton film. That's what it's like. I think it's a bit of a kind of gothic sensibility to it. It's fine, but it's very bleak. It's bleak pretty much without remission. There are a few laughs, but it's largely a downer.
Yeah.
And one thing I noticed, once I'd spotted it, I couldn't unspot it, which is that you never see the character's legs move. Once I spotted it, I couldn't stop looking out for it. It's a nicely animated, stop frame animation film, but clearly showing people's legs when they walk was just too technically difficult.
Huh.
So they never do it.
Well,
so when people walk around you, only see them from the waist up. When you see their legs, they're always standing still.
I forget that. Is it because they're all snails, though, or is it because they...
No. I mean, there are some snails in it, but most of the characters are people.
That's right. She identifies with the snails, and then she keeps snails, doesn't she? She's like,
she does. Yeah, exactly. So
I
she
remember
feels
that
like she wears a snail hat. It's up for an animation Oscar, I think.
Yeah, we did see that a good while ago, maybe 6 weeks, 2 months ago, or something like that. So it's not that memorable for me. I think what's it called? Memoirs of a Snail, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and that's what it feels like a memoir. I just remember having the whole story just constantly talk to me. This snail, this woman, young girl. I guess she's she's an adult. You see the story over maybe 20 years or something like that. So. Yeah. It felt like a memoir. It felt like a lot of just hearing the story and then not really many dramatic scenes, I guess. That's how I remember it. So lives up to its name, at least, right? Memoirs of a Snail.
What's playing at your theatre?
I saw two things, both on airplanes. I saw...
the best place to see a film.
Yeah, it's a great place to see a film. I saw Desperately Seeking Susan. Do you remember this from 1985?
Oh, yes, I do. How does that look now?
Oh, it looks great. I was amazed. I was worried that it was going to be... I mean, it's definitely an 80s film. It feels 80s. Some of the clothing is absolutely terrible, but it's good. It's really tight. There are a couple of very contrived moments that kind of drive the story, but it's tight. It's a good story. It's got a lot of great... John Turturro's in there, Aidan Quinn... Patricia Arquette, Madonna's got a big role in there. Laura Metcalf's in there. So a lot of people who went on to do other things that we know more. But I liked it. I liked it a lot. I remember liking it as a high schooler. Still liked it and was really happy that I still like it because it is one of those
great.
Like core films for me. I also saw a film that we had considered for the podcast briefly called Io Capitano.
Oh, yes.
And talk about mistreatment of immigrants and people who are on the move. I liked a lot of it. It felt very real, and a lot of my students have similar stories, probably not nearly as dramatic, but some similar stories and some harrowing journeys. So it really resonated with me. It didn't really end well. It was one of these films where, God, why didn't they do a little bit more at the end? It closes on probably at least a 60, 90 second, maybe even a 2-minute shot of his face after the main character has migrated from Senegal to Italy, harrowing journey through Libya, I believe, and I think Libya is the only country they kind of get. I just have to look at my geography a little bit better, but they go through a couple of countries, ends up getting into Tripoli and losing track of his cousin en route and rejoining, and then he's asked miraculously to guide a boat across the Mediterranean. Is that the Mediterranean? It is Mediterranean. To get to Italy, and it kind of ends on his face without really concluding the story. I didn't think that was the natural ending, and it was a long shot. The other thing was it was a long shot. Well, hey, you could use that time to call his mother because she'd been in there. That was one of the concerns, or get the boy to the hospital, or the woman who was giving birth on the boat, get her somewhere. It was a very odd way for me to experience the ending. So I was up until that point, mostly I was really, really thumbs up all the way, and then it didn't end properly. Anyway, those are the two I saw.
Endings are hard, aren't they? Endings are hard.
Like comedy, right? Comedy's also hard to see.
On Instagram, so we still seem to be on Instagram. I keep threatening to change it. One day I will get round to it. We are at 2 Real Cinema Club. Read the blog, 2realcinemaclub.com. Comment on our YouTube channel or email us. Be it polite or rude, we don't mind. 2realcinemaclub@gmail.com. Next time, it's only February, and we're jumping ahead to September.
Let's do it.
Next time we are watching
September 5. Which is about the Olympics kidnapping of the athletes, the Israeli athletes. Is that correct?
Yeah, in 1972, yes.
I forget. Were those Mexico? Where were those?
That was Munich.
It was in Munich. The Olympics
was
were
in
in
Munich.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, hey, that's a great coincidence because the other film we're going to watch is called Munich. I don't know if they're
Munich.
related.
How did they arrive at that? Yes. Steven Spielberg film from 2005, I think, which I've never seen. Eric Bana is in it. That's all I could tell you.
I think I've seen parts of it, not all of it. People tell me good. I think we're both a little hesitant to have a Steven Spielberg film on the pod.
I don't know. I have a soft spot for Steven Spielberg because I think he knows where to put the camera. That's how I
Perfect. Okay, good. So,
so we are. This is almost like British weather. We are bypassing the summer entirely and going direct to autumn. We will be basking in the sunshine of the popcorn counter next week, and then join us in 2 weeks for September. Until then, thank you as always for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
goodbye.